Episode 38, 7 stars. A Koopa cruiser flew over the ocean, the orange light from the setting sun reflecting off its blue hull. The ocean was smooth, with scarcely a wave upon its surface, as the Koopa cruiser traveled above it, the sound of its engine cutting through the tranquil silence. Skal's Fortescue stood on the bridge, his arms crossed. A Koopa Troopa wearing an old-fashioned flight hat held the wheel, his eyes glazed over and his movements stiff as he dutifully guided the Koopa cruiser to its destination without any unnecessary conversation. Skals was feeling vaguely troubled as he stared out of the main window over the flat, endless ocean. The mass jailbreak from Stoneshell Prison had been something nobody had predicted. This Cobalt was a wild card, somebody 7 stars hadn't accounted for. Come to think of it, even Luigi himself was a wild card. He had been presumed dead since the Battle of Toad Town, and nobody had thought to check since. Corrections must be made, he thought to himself. An organization with such scale and resources as 7 stars could afford setbacks, but they were going to have to make some moves to account for the new pieces that had entered the game. He was en route to headquarters right at this moment, to inform the Grand Star of the circumstances. Everything would fall into place, as it always did. It was a long flight to headquarters. Skals had no companion but the rumbling of the engine. The pilot wasn't one to make noise. It gave him time to think as he looked over the ocean, dyed a brilliant mix of orange and lavender in the sunset. His journey had been a long one, but things were finally about to pay off. It only seemed like yesterday when he had been a teenager in the Shy Guy Bazaar, an orphan who had never had anybody to care for him but had earned a reputation in the streets and slums for being ruthless. When he had been younger he'd have to fight with the other beggars for food that he stole himself, but as the years went by, he got bolder and they'd learned to fear him. When Skals had chanced to break into an elderly Magic Koopa's home and steal a scroll containing the knowledge necessary to use an ancient form of magic known as the Sun's Amber Eyes, that had been the first step in dragging himself out of the slums and into power. He had trained relentlessly, with no mentor and no prior magical experience. Even today Skals was not sure if he was using the Sun's Amber Eyes correctly, but that no longer bothered him. It had made him a force to be reckoned with. Somebody who had caught the eye of the king and the commoner. Skals had not known why they had come to Shy Guy Bazaar, but it had been a meeting that had changed his life forever. They saw potential in him. Potential to be more than the toughest thief in the slums. They had brought him to their organization, 7 stars. All of this had happened more than 60 years ago. The potions brewed in the depths of 7 stars labs kept him young and fresh. But while his body had not changed, the same could not be said for 7 stars. The king had betrayed the organization decades ago, and was long dead. Skals hadn't mourned him, he didn't think he'd ever mourn anyone. People, to him, were either to be respected or feared, never loved. That was the way it had always been for him. A thick fog began to gather over the ocean, until Skals could scarcely see where he was going. He knew he was getting close. There was a small pop and the flight cap on the Koopa floated off his head, transforming with a puff of smoke into a white top hat with eyes.
"Are you still doing this, Skals? How many more people are you going to kill?"
the inhabitant of the Cap Kingdom asked intensely. Skals smiled.
"Be quiet, Cappy,"
he urged.
"You should know by now that that doesn't trouble me. Life is life. We all live, we all die. It doesn't matter to me when I die, and it doesn't matter to me when you die. I could kill you right now and not feel a thing, but of course I wouldn't do that, because you're useful to me right now. You need to fly me to headquarters."
Cappy sighed. The ghostly hat looked deeply disgusted, but he always looked that way when Skals spoke about those kind of things. He was a former ally of Mario, Skals had heard, but that didn't really matter. It was only coincidence that two had even met. The Cap Kingdom had been owned by 7 stars for years, closed off to all foreigners except at trading ports like Bonneton. People usually paid it no interest, except for when Bowser had attacked them to kidnap a Cap ghost of a Tiara and Mario chanced to fall down to Bonneton. After that whole adventure had been over, Cappy had come home and 7 stars made extra sure that nobody would come in or get out of the Cap Kingdom. It was essential, of course. The Koopa Cruiser broke through the mist, revealing the lights of Cap Kingdom. They were shining golden from the tall, hat-topped towers of the city, skyscrapers that zigzagged in otherworldly ways. The Koopa Cruiser began to go into a landing. It was a handy way to travel, since Koopa Troop patrols didn't pay you much attention. The Cap Kingdom was considered part of Sector 3, but it belonged to the Koopa Empire only in name. Oh, the fleets had shown up at the Cap Kingdom's doorstep all right, but 7 stars had dealt with them and commanded Cap ghosts to take over the minds of the survivors. The Koopas thought they had won that battle, and even the members of High Command believed that the Cap Kingdom was nothing more than a simple imperial territory. The controlled members reported peaceful-sounding things to their superiors over on Isle Delfino, and nobody gave much thought to the situation. The Koopa Cruiser came to a halt on the landing strip. Cappy popped up from the Koopa's head again to give one final jab.
"Even if Mario is dead, other people will stop you,"
he insisted.
"The Koopas haven't crushed everyone."
Skulls chuckled softly.
"I appreciate your optimism, Cappy, but you've never seen me go all out."
With that, he left the bridge and Cappy behind. The capital city of the Cap Kingdom had a cool climate, and it always seemed to be foggy, rainy, or windy. Despite that, it was quite the city, one of the most beautiful Skulls had ever been in. The street lamps cast a mystifying golden glow on the fog around them, and the architecture was elegant and refined. The Cap people seemed to live rather content lives despite the restrictions 7 stars placed upon them, although Skulls had never really cared too much for them. They could go about buying and selling, going on dates and raising children, growing old and dying. Mundane things for mundane people. Skulls Fortescue considered himself anything but mundane. A few decades ago, Skulls reflected as he walked down the black brick sidewalk, some of the ghostly inhabitants of the city floating by him. The Cap Kingdom had had a prime minister. He had been some pompous fellow, a big top hat who looked like he had been made of velvet. Skulls had killed him, of course. The Grand Star often got him to do the dirty work. It was a job he did gladly, even enjoyed at times. The thrill of taking a life was nearly as exciting as the thrill of real, genuine danger, although the latter wasn't something Skulls had experienced since his days back at the Shy Guy Bazaar. Back all those years ago, Skulls never would have thought much of the man who led 7 stars, since he had been quite overshadowed by his companion, the king. But in time it had become abundantly clear that the commoner had been the superior of the two. That was why, now, so many years later, the king was dead and the commoner was about to bring upon the next, perfect age of world history. Skulls stopped at an ordinary apartment house with a hat-shaped knocker. He paused for a moment, letting the hat release a scanner that confirmed his identity, before opening the door. Contrary to what one would expect, it did not open into an apartment. This entire apartment building, in fact, was empty, although it was still lit so as not to seem too suspicious. The front door led to a small room made of dark purple metal. Skulls closed the door behind him and pressed a button. Slowly, the floor began to descend. Skulls rode the elevator down for about 10 minutes, and then 2 metal doors slid upon to allow passage to the hallway beyond. The hallway was made of the same dark purple metal and there were adjoining doors to it, along with a few 7 stars members dressed in the uniforms and visors that they were all required to wear. They were all color-coded to their division. He saw a silver uniform, 2 blue ones, and a yellow. As Skulls passed them, they stood stiffly at attention. At the end of the hallway, Skulls stepped into a room like a man-made gorge, more than a mile across and stretching down so far the end was not even in sight. Hundreds of levels surrounded the gorge, each stacked up on top of each other and connected by several thin bridges that spanned the endless gap. Thousands of brightly colored 7 Stars members were walking both on the bridges and on the walkways that ringed the gap, going to and fro on various duties and walking into and coming out of the countless corridors that opened up into the huge central chamber. Skulls strode to the railing and looked over the site, so unimaginably large that a more narrow-minded person, if told of its existence, might even believe they were being told a lie. This was the power of 7 Stars. All-powerful and invincible, always in the shadows and never outsmarted. To think that he, Skulls Fortescue, was one of its top leaders. My, how he had come up in the world.
"Ah, Purple Star!"
came a voice to Skulls' right. He turned to see a black-scaled Kremling with a silver trench coat approaching him, smiling with his toothy mouth.
"It's been a while since you've been at headquarters, hasn't it been?"
Snadlash! Skulls addressed the Kremling curtly. Snadlash sat on the board of directors with the title of Silver Star, but he was the youngest of them all and lacked experience. Or, as it seemed, common sense.
"Please tell me. Are you still feeling the sores from when that Yoshi and his friends made a fool of you on your own ship?"
Snadlash scowled. Skulls trusted that the other board members had given him to end of trouble, as well.
"It was a mistake,"
he hissed.
"We're not supposed to make mistakes,"
Skulls said lightly.
"Now, I'm not interested in talking to you right now. Where is the Grand Star?"
Snadlash seemed to regain his composure.
"He's in the sanctum, like he usually is at this hour. Don't you think?" "I know exactly what I think,"
Skulls replied.
"Thank you for your help, Silver Star. Do brush up on your analysis of opponents. If you had fought seriously, you could have killed them all and this whole business would be done with."
Skulls left the Kremling to ponder his thoughts and made his way to one of the base's many elevators, passing several agents along the way. Once inside the elevator, Skulls set it to take him to floor 256, one of the very deepest. The entrance to the base he had taken opened up on floor 5, but all the really important rooms were near the bottom, so deep that even the explosion of a nuclear bomb wouldn't scratch them. It was darker on the lower levels, although everything was still lit by low purple lights. There were less agents on this floor too, although there were a few Skulls walked past on his way to the corridor leading into the sanctum. Most wore the orange uniforms of the Grand Star's personal guard. Once Skulls made his way to the corridor, he found himself blocked by a large door. A small scanner peeked out of it and scanned his eye, before the doors opened to admit Skulls into yet another empty hallway. They shut behind him. As Skulls walked down the hallway, mechanical arms came from the wall. Skulls unbuttoned his white suit to let them take it and dropped his pants down to around his ankles, until his body was only covered by his red shell. The mechanical arms twisted around him, taking a skin sample, a fingerprint sample, and a sample of his shell. The arms retreated back into the wall, giving Skulls his clothes back. Skulls put them on, smoothed down his suit, and adjusted his hat.
"Identity confirmed, Skallz Fortescue. Rank, Purple Star."
With a rumble, the huge doors at the end of the hallway slid open, and Skulls walked into the sanctum. It was a huge room, and mostly bare. The orange lights on the purple floors and ceilings gave it a similar color to the sunset. Skulls felt small as he walked to the center of the room, where a man, bathed in shadows from the dim orange lit, stood looking at the massive amber crystal that filled the end of the room. The crystal stretched from the floor and halfway up the ceiling, being the only point of interest in the entire room. Advanced medical equipment surrounded it, tubes sticking into the crystal and pumping countless mixtures into the motionless figure trapped in its center. In the crystal's center was Mario, frozen in the exact same pose he had held before the bullet bills had struck him, the tube sticking into several parts of his body as the liquid flowed into him, same as it had for year after year. Skulls knelt on the cold metal floor before the shadowy figure who stood, watching Mario.
"Grand Star,"
he said respectfully.
"I have news. There has been some unfortunate developments. I trust Snadlash has already informed you of his mishap, but the Blue Yoshi has become even more troublesome. He's freed several prisoners. People who we already believed to be out of the calm."
"Quiet, Skulls." The Grand Star's voice was low and calm, and carried throughout the entire room. There was a sort of power to it, power that commanded both respect and fear.
"Do not fear it. These men and women that have been freed, this Yoshi and his allies. They may fight, they may destroy, they may even set his back, but that does not change reality. I have been informed of most of this already. There will be no major alterations to the plan."
Skulls breathed a sigh of relief.
"Thank you,"
he said.
"Do you believe we are nearing the end of it?" "It has been a long road, Skulls Fortescue,"
came the voice of the Grand Star.
"But yes. The Koopa Empire, Luigi's resistance, Fire Flower, the Neo Empire. All of these forces are about to collide, and when they do, all will, at long last, be silent."
The Grand Star turned and began to walk towards Skulls. He cast a long shadow over the ground as the light fell upon him. The Grand Star was a human, and what struck Skulls was just his similar. He looked to Luigi. They were relatively the same height. Perhaps the Grand Star was a little taller, and they had the same mustache and large nose. The Grand Star's face was lined and hard, however. Even with 7 stars H freezing formulas, he still didn't look any younger than his late 50s. The Grand Star wore an open orange trench coat over a plain black shirt and pants. On his head was an orange hat much like the ones the Mario brothers wore, and on it in the place of the M or L was the letter A.
"Tell me, Skulls, have you heard of the Star Children?"
the Grand Star asked as he continued to walk forward, his footsteps echoing around the vast chamber.
"Yes, you've mentioned them before, Antonio,"
Skulls replied.
7 children, with destinies and power that set them above all others,"
Antonio said, with a gaze at Mario in the crystal.
"Children, who, as adults, would determine the course of the world. In time, they would pass their legacy to others. Bowser, to his children, Luigi, to this Blue Yoshi. And of course, my beautiful Red Star passed his legacy to all the friends and companions he made throughout his eventful life. This world is controlled by extraordinary people, Skulls. And when extraordinary people come to blows, the entire world shakes. As you yourself proved when you dueled our traitorous former member, King Morden,"
Skulls replied. Antonio nodded.
"The first Koopa War changed the destinies of the 2 kingdoms,"
he said, turning around with a swish of his coat to look back at the crystal.
"Much like the war against the Shadow Queen changed the world, bringing an end to one of the world's most prosperous kingdoms. This world is teetering on an edge, Skulls Fortescue. Incredibly powers of both darkness and light, each wielded by individuals. But that era is almost at an end, Skulls."
He tightened his hand into a fist, bathed in the amber glow of the room's lights as he stared at Mario's crystal.
"Everything has been leading up to this final event. On that day, I shall strike the stars above and the darkness below, and most of all, the 7 star children and their disciples. There will be an end to the extraordinary, and balance and peace will finally reign. A day we all look forward to, Grand Star Antonio.
Skulls replied. He personally didn't care about all that, he just enjoyed the excitement. The journey was more important than the destination.
You have no idea how much I have sacrificed for this day to come,
Antonio said. His voice betrayed no emotion, it was as calm and authoritative as always.
My chance to know my boys. My chance to be acknowledged as the hero of the First Kupa War. Well, I suppose one of those will be corrected. The process is almost complete. Soon, my Red Star will join us at the table. An enjoyable thought, to be sure.
Skulls nodded, although the prospect was a bit unnerving. Mario, the hero respected throughout the entire world, who was thought to be dead. Skull's personal skills had come in handy there. Yes, Mario had been struck by many bullet bills and probably would have died, had it not been for Skulls, who, on Antonio's orders, had retrieved the body. Everybody had simply thought Mario had been vaporized by the sheer force of 50 consecutive bullet bill explosions. That very well could have happened if it hadn't have been for him. Soon, however, Mario would be out of his stasis and take his seat on the board of directors. He even had his own division trained up, 7 stars agents in red uniforms.
The entire world has been moving towards this one moment, Skulls,
said Antonio, looking back at him with his ice blue eyes.
When I murdered Queen Laveria Kupa all those years ago, I set my children and Morton's brat on a course of conflict all for this own purpose. They've all played into my hands perfectly.
Antonio walked towards Skulls, who rose to meet him.
Very soon, things will come to an end,
he said calmly.
When all of the forces that determine the power in this world, all of the extraordinary individuals come together, that is when it will happen.
A small smile played at the corner of Antonio's lips.
The silence of a peaceful world will be beautiful, won't it, Skulls?
Skulls did not reply, as it sounded rather boring to him. Once their plan was completed, he'd have to take a trip off-planet, most likely. Or perhaps even travel to another dimension somehow if Antonio's plan was as far-reaching as it seemed. Of course, he wasn't one to worry about things like that when there were still things to do and people to kill. On the subject of killing, in fact, there was something that was grating on Skull's nerves.
Antonio, I confess,
Skulls admitted,
these star children and their allies, they will fight against you, you know. We can't hope they'll all be wiped out fighting each other, and there is, however unlikely, a chance that they could, in fact, stop the event.
The room was silent for a moment. The Antonio struck. It happened in a split second and even an expert fighter like Skulls was unable to react. Antonio had grabbed him by the collar. A knife made of red-hot flame that looked surprisingly solid slid out of his wrist, just barely grazing Skull's throat.
Oh, that's less than unlikely, Skulls Fortescue,
Antonio said calmly.
Why, Grand Star?
Antonio smiled.
Why, because to do that, they'd actually have to defeat me.